if you Google NASA causes of climate change, you'll come to this website that's done by climate.nasa.gov, and they will show this graph. And then people are thinking, oh, NASA, they landed us on the moon, so they must be these great. They must know what they're talking about. And I guess I just, before we get onto that, I just want to address that appeal to authority. NASA, they are a great organization. They achieved an awful lot. They did get to the moon, though some conspiracy theorists might dispute that. But yeah, Willie, you actually know one of the people who was on the moon, don't you? I think you.
Yeah, of course, Harrison Smith, even Walter Cunningham, some of this pilot. But anyway,
Yeah,
just to explain the graph, the red is temperature, the yellow is sun. I mean,
yeah,
obviously, if you look at the graph, I think we should give a round of applause because they win again. Because this is the graph that they often say, "Oh, Willie Soon doesn't know what he's talking about. Ronan Conley is stupid. Michael Connelly is even dumber." None of us know what we're talking about, and therefore they win. They always wanted to win like this. It's called rhetorical argument, not factual. So that's
yeah,
the problem. And then, of course, using the authority and prestige of NASA, who, by the way, doesn't know how to bring these people from the space station back. It require Elon Musk, and then Boeing failed them. So
yeah.
there are a lot of problem like that. But now
Yeah.
I think we should just get on and explain what
Yeah,
we have to say about this.
yeah, no. So to just wrap up on the thing about the NASA itself, the as an organization, there's thousands of employees working for NASA. There's many different divisions. This particular division, climate.nasa.gov, I think it's in the down in the California, one of the Californian places, isn't it? Mostly, but they there are different divisions, and this graph, the red graph, was developed by NASA GIS, which is based in Manhattan, in New York City, and so there are different regions. So when you say NASA, you have to say which part of NASA and what scientists in NASA, and but let's look at this, and
I just want to
so
correct one thing. This thing probably not from California. It could be the DC office. I mean Langley and places like that. But
yeah, I
it's
think
okay.
I
It
looked.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But Goddard Institute for Space Study is indeed the one that generated the temperature curve that we disagree with. Okay.
Yeah. Now, so just for those of you that are listening, what we're showing a graph, and we've a red line that NASA gives is the global temperature since 1880, and it shows it rising and rising and rising up to 2018, which is when the time series ends. And then they show this yellow graph showing the what they say is the total solar irradiance, or they say it's solar irradiance or solar activity. And it kind of rises from 1880 up to the 1950s, and then it falls. And so the implication is, well, if solar activity is to blame, then why did it decrease as the other one went up? And so that's the premise. And we've already effectively debunked this in at least four peer reviewed papers. And so I'm showing the references here. You can look these up. Each of these papers is a separate analysis, but they each show that essentially the claims made on that graph have been debunked. But there's two parts we need to talk about. First is the red curve, the temperature record. So this is the GIS temps global temperature record, and the big problem is they use urban data as well as rural data. And so, Michael, did you want to talk about
Yeah,
the? Yeah,
basically, when people are trying to establish what the global temperature is, what they do is there are about 7,000 in the GIST record three.
six
There were
thousand. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
there were about 7,000 stations, and they get the average temperature for each of those stations for the year, and then they do what's called a gridded average for to get the an average value for the whole world. And but the problem with that is that these stations, an awful lot of them are in urban areas. And even though they claim they've looked at the urban heat island effect, uh, uh, and that it's not significant, this isn't quite true.
Yeah,
This is the urban heat island effect basically is urban areas tend to have a warmer temperature than rural areas. There are several reasons for this. One of them is that when the rain lands on an urban area, it gets flooded down into shores and is carried away, whereas it lands on a green area, the water seeps down into the ground and later on it's evaporated off and helps cool the non urban areas. But then there's other things like when sunlight lands on rock or concrete, it's turned into heat. Whereas when it lands on a plant, a lot of the energy is turned into plant biomass and not into heat.
yeah,
So and then there are other effects that can take place. For example, if you're not evaporating off the water from the urban areas. That means there has been papers published in the last couple of years showing that means there's less clouds over the urban areas, and so you get more sunlight coming in. But
yeah,
there's lots of different things. But on this map here, what you
yeah,
can see quite clearly is that the blue areas are cold and the red areas are warm. And when you look at the satellite, you can see the blue areas correspond to plant growth and parks, whereas the warm areas are due to the concrete. And you can see it's several degrees warmer just within Washington on this particular time.
yeah.
So
So
it's not uncommon for urban areas to be several degrees warmer than the surrounding rural areas. It can be 8, 9 degrees in some particular cases. Madrid, for example, is a lot warmer, Buenos Aires, and so on. So this is a well known and has been known for over 100 years, the
yeah,
urban heat island effect. But because of most of the stations that are used are in urban areas, then you get an urban heat island bias
yeah,
going into the temperature. And
yeah,
again, in that 2015 paper where you studied, we isolated out the urban areas and
yeah.
then the rural areas that were still rural. And we found that the trends from the rural areas were totally different from
Right.
the urban
Yeah.
areas.
So
Next
I
slide. Next
just
slide. Go next slide.
yeah, no, so just to summarize again what we're doing. So this, for the people that are just listening, we're looking here at a satellite image above Washington D.C., and then looking at a heat map image, and you can see that the urban areas are warmer. You can detect that yourself if you live in an urban area. If you have like a thermometer in your car as you drive into an urban area, have a look at the thermometer. And then when you're going out of the urban area, you might find that it gets warmer. You'll probably find that it gets warmer by several degrees as you enter into the city and then leave. And then the thing is that, as we say in this point out on this slide, the urban areas, it is human caused climate change, but urban areas only represent 3 to 4% of the land area, but they make up the majority of the longest weather station records. So they're using urban stations for analyzing global temperatures is not representative of global temperatures. That's a problem. It's an what we call is urbanization bias. And just to show you, if you schematically if you had a rural weather station, say in the 1950s, and then over time it became an urban area, well, then it will show a warming due to the urbanization, the local urban warming that is taking place around the weather station. And so you can, and this urban heat island expands over time. So you need to correct for this. And then but here's the thing. So this is looking at the stations in GHCN. This is Global Historical Climatology Network version 3. That's the same data set that GISTEMP 3.1 used. But they used, put in all of the stations, and they said almost all, like 99%, and they said they apply, they let a computer program homogenize the data. We'll talk about this a bit more in the final part of today's podcast. But just to show you, here is a map of the stations in 1881 to 1910, which have the data for it. And I don't know if you're looking at the screen, you could see it's almost all in the northern hemisphere. There's almost nothing in the southern hemisphere. But GISTEMP says it's global, but it's mostly relying just a handful. And almost all of the stations in both hemispheres that go back to the early 20th century are urban now. They are now urban. So they will have experienced urban heat islands.
Uh,
And I,
just, just a little note on that, Ronan.
yeah,
Uh, it, um, Back when I was born, most of the people lived in rural areas,
yeah,
and so they experienced the rural climate. But if you look at, there has been a drift in towards the cities with the populations. So sometime around, depending on which source you look at, sometime around 2010, more people started to live in urban areas than rural areas.
yeah,
And so now the majority of people, I'll let you in a minute, really. I just want to finish this. The majority of people living in urban areas are experiencing man-made global or
man-made
man-made
climate change.
warming, uh, whereas people in rural areas don't experience that same thing. Sorry, Willie. I
Oh
Go
yeah,
ahead, Billy.
I mean, this is the kind of thing that I think not too many people call out. People like NASA, GIS, and NASA Goddard Institute for Space Study. Look, how do you defend yourself when you say this is global where there's no data? That's why it's becoming like a very strange kind of a non-science issue. That's why I think we should move to the next slide, please, which
Yeah,
I
yeah.
take the
So
time.
here
It
what
is
I'm
really
just
not difficult at all to understand this problem because
yeah.
they literally keep claiming that they can produce a global temperature curve or even northern hemisphere, but they actually insist on taking some of this urban. There's another problem that we will explain, of course, in the part three. But if you look at it, if you take rural and urban stations, take an average, who doesn't know how to do that, please?
Yeah,
Everybody know how to do that. We know how to do that. In fact, one of the graph, which is if you look carefully, the black thick curve is actually our work. We agree exactly with them, but we
yeah,
don't believe that this is the correct way to represent the temperature of to study,
yeah.
let's say, rising carbon dioxide because it's
Yeah,
contaminated by urban heat island bias, right?
yeah, so to explain this graph here, this is from Soon et al. 2023, one of the papers we mentioned. And in it, we were just showing, yeah, if you use all of the stations, including the urban stations, we can get the same result. And you can see our one is black, and the GIS temp is the purple dashed one. The crew temp is the red. You see the fact all of these ones all look identical. That's why you can't see it because yeah, if you mix together urban and rural, then you're going to get the average of, and it's mostly urban stations that have the longest records. So we are pointing out, yeah, we can using our the same. We know how to get the results, but we're saying we need to deal with the hard problem of what is rural uh, climate change. What's happening outside? If you want to know about global temperature change and not just the urban areas, which is only 3% of the planet, you need to work out what the uh, you can't rely on the urban stations, and then the urban heat island, the IPCC, in their latest assessment report, they just said, oh, it's probably less than 10%. And we could do another talk. In fact, we've done talks, so we could dig into this particular claim. It's plucked from air, is based on a 1990 study which was debunked by two of the authors of the paper. Like there's a whole thing there. Which, Willie, you wanted to
No,
say
I
something?
think the one that you highlight the text from the AR6 report working group one need to be read out loud,
Oh
so
yeah,
so that
yeah.
you can hear
Okay,
yourself how ridiculous.
let me read it out.
Yeah.
No recent literature has emerged to alter the AR5. AR5 was the 2013 report. No recent literature has emerged to alter the AR5 finding that it is unlikely that any uncorrected effects from urbanization or from changes in land use, land cover have raised global land surface air temperature trends by more than 10%. So they say
Now, just that was quite false because we had published papers. Not only us, but other people had published papers, and
Yes.
in fact, they
Yes.
were called out on that by a number of journalists.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
yeah.
think we should not hide behind anything. I remember discussing extensively with Ronan and Michael. If there is a purpose for me, really soon in life, would be that we want to make sure that all the credible scientists who serious about truth and facts we're actually beginning to sort of say that UN IPCC report, you please keep doing what you're doing, but we're not going to listen to you anymore. You're not credible. You're not science based. You're anti-science. There's so many problems in that, but I don't want to get into all that. But the point is that if that is a purpose of Willie Soon in life, is that we want to say that IPCC report is not serious and
Well,
should be
Willie,
sort of ignored.
to a large extent, what you're saying isn't quite. The, the IPCC is a marketing organisation, and they're doing a brilliant job. We've got to hand it to them. They are out there. Their job is to promote the UN ideologies, whether they're good or bad, and they're doing that brilliantly. And so we can't flaw them for doing their job. But to say that they're a science organization and what they do constitutes science is just totally
What?
false.
Yeah, yeah. What I would say is there is a term pseudoscience, which is used bandied around, but literally it means false science. So you get pseudo is when something tries to create the appearance that they're doing something. Like you could have these insects that pseudo poisonous, but the IPCC, a lot of people are thinking that they are accurately and fairly reviewing all of the scientific literature. But if you actually go to their website and look at their remit, they're very careful. They don't say that they're accurately reviewing, assessing the science.
What
They,
was
yeah,
Sorry,
they're,
what was interesting about that report there was that the co-chair of the IPCC at the time, Pan Mao Chai, had
yeah,
actually quoted our papers in his own papers.
yeah.
So saying that no recent papers came out was just ludicrous.
Yeah, and then a journalist for the Epoch Times, Alex Newman, specifically went and asked them, but why did you say no recent literature has emerged
Right.
when the co-chair of the entire report was aware of a at least soon et al. 2015, and the IPCC, after consideration, wrote back to the journalist and said that the co-chairs were not involved in the writing of the individual chapters. So that's just to give you an idea of how disorganized you could do. But let's keep going on, and just to because to say, is it 10%? Well, what we did is we showed you earlier that we were able to replicate the same results as GIS Temp 3. But when we repeated our analysis using only rural stations and without using direct correcting for non-climatic biases instead of the automated homogenization, which we'll talk about in part three. But we get this result instead. And so I don't know if you can see people that are looking at this, uh, there you can see similar trends, but you get with the rural only, you have warming from 1880s up to the 1940s, but then you get cooling to the 1970s, and then you get warming, and so you have more of a cyclical pattern, which is not. explained by CO2 or the anthropogenic forcing.
What we can point out there, Ronan, is that if you look at from the 1800s up to the 1940s, the rate of warming was about the same as it was from the 70s up to the 2000.
Yeah,
Uh, Even though there wasn't a carbon dioxide problem back
yeah.
then. So I
So
suppose,
yeah, so to summarize, the key point here is that the GIST temp tree is basically this graph. Um, and then but if they had used rural only, they would have gotten a different result. So that's the first major problem with that climate gap. And people might say, "Oh, that's just the temperatures. They used oceans." So just quickly show you that we see the same results. This is in the Conley et al. 2023 and in Conley et al. 2021. You can see the rural record, and you can see the sea surface temperatures, tree ring proxies, glacier lengths, weather balloons, satellites, ocean heat content. All of these estimates, independent measures of global temperatures, our northern hemisphere temperatures show similar trends, slightly different.
just to summarize, the rural areas show a cyclical pattern. It's going through periods of warming, cooling, warming, whereas the urban stations, or the combined set of both urban and rural, show almost continuous warming.
Yeah, and
Uh,
so we now let's quickly we'll have to try and
We have to
get
speed it up a bit,
through this
Ronan.
stuff here, but let's look at the solar activity. And so this is the yellow part, the yellow graph, and here's the key point. They used the Satire T2 uh, total solar irradiance, or TSI, reconstruction. And you'd say, oh, like, I'm sure NASA knows about the satellite. Well, they no, there's actually a lot of different groups looking at this. This was not a NASA study. In fact, we've worked with like the groups in charge of NASA's Akram satellites, and they would disagree with this plot. And so this is the Max Planck Institute Satire T2 reconstruction. So in Conley et al. 2023, we went and we said how many different TSI reconstructions are, and we found 27, and just showing you different ones, and they each show different results. Now, we didn't actually include Satire T2, we included Satire T1 and Satire M, which was the most recent one at the time by the Max Planck Institute group. Yeah, and yeah, did you want to say something on this,
Yeah,
Ronan?
yeah. I want to say this is a cosmic tragedy. It's very comical. It's cherry picking, right? I mean, I would supply them the cherry myself to actually to tell them that please try. I mean, it's such a ridiculous thing. This is why sometimes it just really I scratch my head all the time because we're not trying to win. We're not trying to say we're smart, this and that. It's just ridiculous, you know. Every time when we say we want to study how the sun affect the climate, they say it's all been debunked, it's finished. And I often say that please stop funding the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Study or any of this NASA agency because they already understood everything. But by just doing such a silly thing, you know, it's a very silly thing because they just count on people not checking or the journalists and the politician and irresponsible scientists. You know, this is why, again, like I say, if there isn't a purpose to my existence, is to actually try to tell you, please, science is very important, and this is not the way to do science. And this is, I think, Ronan, for the sake of time, I think we can move on.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So, well, just to say for people that are looking, this we did this study in was published in late 2023, and simultaneously, the Max Planck Institute, the MPS group that created the satire TSI, they also had a paper published, a review that was that went and this is the Max Planck Institute for Solar Systems Research, Chastitzer-Gas et al., Krivova and Professor Krivova and Dr. Yo, um, and they also went and said, Oh, they went and found a lot of different TSI reconstructions in it. They actually found 32. Now, when we looked at it, 18 of our 27 overlapped with theirs. But we each found ones that the other group hadn't done because it was an independent. So between us, there's like 41 different ones. Now, you will say um, that in this group, they made the distinction. They said that they preferred the reconstructions that were published after more recently. They chose after I think 2011, and they said 2012, and they said older, newer ones must be better than older. We don't agree with that. That's an argumentum ad novitatem, and it's like just because it's new doesn't mean that it's better. Like there's the remake of Snow White is in the I think is opening in the cinemas now. Snow White was Disney's first movie, and so we'll see which one is better. One is a remake, but like a lot of people seem to be suggesting that the original 1930s animated cartoon may have more lasting appeal than this recent remake. Um,
Right. The emperor that got no pants on and not the emperor new pants. I mean, it makes no difference. But let's move.
Yeah, yeah. So just that you could see that they divided it up into before and after 2012, and they're saying, but you can see Satire T1 is that light green one, bright green one in there. If you're looking at the screen, it's a big mess.
Ronan is very good in detail, so please, we actually study everything. There's no stone and little rock left unflipped. We look behind everything just to make sure that we know what we're talking about. That's
Yeah.
the whole purpose of science.
This looks like a bit of a mess, but yeah. So the dark green is Satire
I
M,
can't see it, Ronan.
and the light green, which you can see, there's one of the graphs that's in there in the mess. That's Satire T2. That's the one that NASA Climate graph used. And just to memify this, according to Chad Sistergas et al. 2013, uh, this graph is useless. It's completely
Oh,
out of date, but this one is still up to date. So if people are looking at the screen and they can say, "Wow, these are very different." That's there you go. But if we just look at the ones in the new TSI that we also looked at, here's four that we found, and that's the one that the IPCC used in for their climate model hindcasts. This is Satire M, which is similar to Satire T, and you can see, it shows that slight rising from 1880 up to 1950s, then a fall. But if they use, say,
right.
Penza,
Similar to the NASA gives that the plot that they show, right? Just
yeah, yeah.
emphasize that.
If they'd used, say, Penz et al. Or Egorov et al. Used the MU16 reconstruction, they got different results. We're not saying which one of these, if any of these are correct, but the point is, they just plotted one, and they were trying to pull the wool over your eyes. I think either
Very
they don't
picking.
know what they're talking about, and they aren't familiar with the literature, and that there's dozens of these TSI reconstructions, or they just were cherry picking. And we'll leave that up to you to decide. But the bottom line is that to conclude, their red graph has uses urban data. It has too much urban warming, and their yellow graph is just one of more than 40 estimates of solar activity they could have picked. So
But it
just
was picked as the one that shows the least effect due to sun.
yeah,
By the way, same with IPCC, of course, they did the same move.
yeah.
And then I think the key line is your bottom line, Ronan. Read it out, is the third
But
point.
this was not done by the NASA scientists that got us to the moon. Um, for any of the conspiracy theorists out there that are disputing the moon landing, Willie, did you just want to just say you know personally you've had many meetings
Oh,
with?
that was a very cute story because when they accuse us for saying that we don't believe in, that moon landing is actually is a stage kind of thing in a Hollywood studio. It's about 2009. I myself decided to write a letter that was, saying things like that. So, but one of our co-authors was Harrison Schmidt himself, to say that we have been to the moon, we've been back. We never believe in that false claim anyway. But it is one of the privilege, when you do good science, even Harrison Smith will pay attention to us. I would include Ronan and Michael because that was before I met them. But anyway, I
Yeah,
think that NASA totally discredit themselves, especially NASA Goddard Institute for Space Study, which is quite redundant in the sense that they are not doing any serious work. So in in that sense, Dodge, pay attention. But some of you may disagree with me, but
yeah.
that's my personal opinion. Let's move on to the final part.
Just to say who Harrison Schmidt was, he was the last one of on the last Apollo mission to the moon. So he is one of the most recent people on the moon, and he was uh, the first scientist
Yes.
astronaut who was on the moon, first
And
and last so
he got his
far.
PhD from Harvard, geology. Yes.
Yeah, and he would agree with us. He is unimpressed by on the causes of climate change. He thinks that he doesn't think that this CO2 is the thing.
Oh
He
yeah. If
thinks.
anybody wants to read that letter, I mean, of course, please contact us. We'll send you. Yeah, just for your fun.
So, if anybody shares this graph, or if you've seen this graph, or if you're looking on Googling and trying to find the causes of climate change, and you stumble upon climate.nasa.gov or this graph, you can now you hopefully you're now in a better understanding to say that's not good science.
It's
It's
dead.
a
This
fail.
whole thing
That's
is
a
dead. The
fail.
moon
It
might
is,
not be
it is good marketing, though.
Maybe good marketing, but
good
not
marketing.